Hi, everyone. Welcome to Mind Over Mountain with Cheryl Strayed. My guest today is the amazing Sarah Spain, who many of you know from her podcast, Good Game with Sarah Spain, which is here on the iHeart Women's Sports Network. Sarah, for 2 decades, has been a sports journalist, reporting from the sidelines and the locker rooms on all the games we love and watch, all the competitions that have our hearts racing. Sarah, who's also a former athlete herself, talks to me about her trajectory from college athlete to aspiring comedian to journalist entering a male-dominated field to a journalist who's at the very center of women's sports today. We answer a Dear Sugar letter from a woman who also works in a male-dominated field. Let's listen to my conversation with Sarah. Sarah Spain, welcome to Mind Over Mountain.
Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to have you. I think of you as the goddess of all things sports journalism, specifically women's sports journalism. Do you feel, or like a queen or a goddess or some sort of higher being? Do you feel that?
Yeah, and I think I usually imagine a crown on my head just every day, but now I've elevated it to more of like a glow, because goddess is even one step above queen. So I thank you for that.
Yeah, goddess has a little bit of divinity in it as well as power, right? But honestly, I think you obviously have been such a leader and trailblazer, and here you are, also the creative director of our very own iHeart Women's Sports Media, and I just want to thank you for that. I think that the stories we tell about women's achievement and women's bodies obviously, reverberate through the culture beyond sports. And thank you for being a voice that has been leading the way.
Thanks for saying that. I agree. I think one of my favorite things about sports is how it is an intersection of so many other things. I think I wouldn't really find it very satisfying as my life's work if I didn't feel like it was a place that brings people together to talk about a whole bunch of stuff that they might not otherwise want to discuss or even understand that they were getting into if they didn't want to show up to talk about their favorite athlete or their favorite team and then suddenly realize they were in the midst of discussing, bodily empowerment or feminine rights or other things that are sort of inherently intersectional.
Absolutely. And I think that's both everywhere in the culture that sports, expand beyond that athletic world. And I think that it's everywhere within us too, because there is something elemental and essential about the stories we tell ourselves about what we're capable of. I wanted to share with you something. I have a million things to ask you, but what you just said brought this memory to mind for me. I have a daughter who's 20 now, but back when she was about 7 or 8, we were watching some kind of women's sports. I think it was the Olympics. And my daughter said, well, why did the men and the women compete separately? Why are there just women in this race or in this competition? And I said, well, because men are built physically different. They're stronger in a lot of the sports. And so they divide them by, men and women. And my daughter was so mad at me. She was like, absolutely adamant. She said, Mom, that is not true. That is not true. Men are not stronger than women. And I said, yeah, I know. Women are stronger in all these ways. But I'm just talking about this one, specific muscular way. She rejected that story. And here I've been a feminist all my life. And I was like, I have just been schooled by my daughter who's saying, I refuse that narrative. And
well, there's some cool proof of that in some ways that are surprising. The longer a race is, the more likely that women will surpass men and end up finishing faster. Every time you add more time, it's more likely that women will be stronger. And there's a book that I'm partway through. I want to keep digging into it, but it's called The Stronger Sex. And it actually enumerates so many different ways that women are stronger. It's just the way that we measure strength has been fit into a patriarchal system to reinforce the idea that men are stronger and to limit the amount of time that we spend talking about the ways that women actually prove a different kind of strength. And it's not just mentally, although that, to me, the older I get, the more I'm like, man, women are carrying all the things. And sometimes, not all men, but sometimes men are just like, Ken, it's like, my job is job. Don't hand me anything else or I'll fall apart.
Oh my, yes. We could talk a long time about that. But I think that's, I think you're right. It's factually true that women are outperforming, men in certain arenas. athletic arenas. But also, I just am struck by, and I think that so much of what you're doing in women's sports is essentially aimed at like what my daughter was pointing out. Like, let us not keep telling the story that men are stronger or more capable. And I'm curious, like, how it is you began way back when you were a little girl. Mm-hmm. How did you fall in love with sports?
Well, I think, to the point your daughter was making, also at that age, it is much less clear and obvious. I was beating all the boys in races up until a certain age. I was still beating so many boys in so many sports for most of my life, because if you are an athletic woman, you can hang. And I think I loved that. I loved it for a number of reasons. One, my family was very active growing up. So it was very natural to just be playing tennis and golf and playing sports in the backyard and running and doing all those things. But my sister and I both were very athletic young. And I, in particular, was about 6 feet tall by the time I was 12. So I wanted to use that for something. And I noticed that it gave me an advantage over other people in my sports. And I was a very confident girl in a lot of areas. I was very funny. I was very smart. I was, had a lot of friends, but I was very insecure about my height and whether boys would like me and all the standard things that especially a 6 foot tall 12-year-old with braces and frizzy hair would worry about. And it was not lost on me from a very young age in my teens that being able to use my body for something that made me feel successful instead of just being insecure about being tall was really important. And my parents would always say, stand up straight. If you slouch, it'll look like you're uncomfortable with how tall you are, and being tall is great. And also being a young woman who looked older than I was because I was tall, because I developed early. I got a lot of attention I didn't want from men. And frankly, that I didn't even really understand until a certain point. I didn't really get what was happening between me and men who thought I was older. And when I did, it gave me a lot of shame. And so it was really important for me to see my body as something that did something for me and not as the object of other people's viewing or judgment. And then over the course of my life, I've had a lot of insecurities about my weight just from not fitting the ideal aesthetic standard that our society has basically made, which is like waif thin and not realistic for a lot of people. And so if it weren't for my body being a collegiate heptathlete and a multi-sport athlete in high school that recruited for 3 different sports in college, that I think I would have had even more judgment of it. And thankfully, I was able to say over and over again, oh my gosh, I'm so grateful my body is fast and strong and tall and all these things, and not just whatever you're looking at.
Right. I think that's the difference between it being inside yourself, being the agent, you're literally embodied, versus seeing yourself as the object, which I think, so much in our culture does do that to women, right? There's that word objectification, which means that kind of external viewpoint. And for me, in my experience too, at every stage of my life, that doing rather than being the object, being the subject is everything. So you were a heptathlete, which is an incredibly Olympian word to try to say. Heptathlete. Will you list them off for our listeners who might not have memorized them? I know, I think the javelin is the most exciting one, right?
I love the javelin. So javelin, high jump, hurdles, 800, 200, shot put, long jump.
Okay, that's a lot of different things to be like good at or good enough.
Run, jump, and throw. All the things.
It's like the whole thing. Is there any like napping involved there? No, just
well, the heptathlon at least is outdoors, and there is a 2 days. So you do 4 one day and 3 the next, but you do have to finish sprinting half a mile, which is just the most brutal and terrible thing when you're already tired. And indoors, it's a pentathlon. Just 1 day, but you only have to do 5 in 1 day. So,
oh my gosh. So what did that look like for you? You're a college athlete. You're competing at a pretty high level at that point.
Yeah.
What happened, and why did you not continue as a competitor beyond college?
Yeah. Well, so, it was a really great balance. And I think a lot of women athletes in non-revenue driving sports get that great balance of being an athlete and being a student in the way that most people are promised is happening across the board, but really is pretty limited. A lot of the folks that are in, say, men's basketball and football are kind of told not to take certain classes or labs that'll interfere with sports, and they don't really get the education part. I got to go to Cornell University, be a track athlete, be, involved in every part of being a student there. But junior year, I tore my Achilles. And unfortunately, when they went in to do the surgery, it was about an eighth the size of a normal Achilles. So instead of sewing it to itself, they took a piece of my calf out that allegedly wasn't that useful anymore due to evolution and wrapped it around. It's been about 20 years. It seems pretty important because my calf is still like 2.5 inches smaller than the other. I have to shove a sock in there when I wear like a knee-high boot. And calf raises and all the things. And then over the course of time, it created a kinetic chain imbalance. So basically, because my one leg was so much stronger than the other, it made it hard to do a lot of things. I tried to come back to heptathlon, started to get arthritis in my foot. So senior year, I just did javelin. And then unfortunately, it's like been the story of my time post-collegiately when I thought I would be beating everyone's ass and pick up basketball and winning club championships in tennis and doing all the things, tough mutters and half marathons. I'm really so limited still all these years later because it created back issues and all the other stuff. So the toll of being a collegiate Division I athlete lasts a lot longer than just when you're there if you're unlucky like me. But I'm grateful for what I can still do, and I try to do as much as I can with what I got.
And was that a big heartbreak for you? Were those your highest ambitions as a young woman, that you would be a professional athlete? Or
no, I think I knew that college was the end of it. I wasn't going to be an Olympian. And that's really where track goes. Like, right, being a professional track athlete, that's the highest. You can be a pro and not be an Olympian, but it's not the same as had I been a basketball athlete with the WNBA and thinking about that professional league. I think I knew I was done. I think the problem is I thought I would be a lifelong athlete, and it is still a massive part of my identity. And I'm approaching more years not being quote unquote an athlete as many as I was, but it doesn't feel like that. It was so important to who I was in junior high, in high school, in college, that to now at this age, and I'm getting all these cool opportunities from my work at ESPN and at iHeart to play in like celebrity basketball games, or I just got asked to play an Alex Morgan, Mia Hamm soccer game.
Oh my gosh.
I say, no, I can't do it. And it's
really?
it's not.
Nobody has offered me any of these things yet, Sarah.
You got to get out. Well, now you're part of iHeart Women's
I'm
Sports,
just
so
started down here.
Sporty Spice era for you is about
Come on.
But yeah, I mean, that would have been the dream back in the day. And I'm so competitive. I would have had so much fun doing all that stuff. So, I mean, I really haven't even been allowed to jog for 7 or 8 years. So that's how significant what I'm dealing with is. So I can't just say yes and then pay the consequences later. It's a long-term thing I'm trying to recover from. So, so that part sucks. And I do think every athlete has that moment of, this was my whole identity. Who and what am I after this? Mine was a lot quicker. I didn't get to, I have a lot of college teammates from Cornell that are doing like CrossFit competitions or all these different marathons, like all these ways that they're still using the part of them that was such a big thing. And now I'm doing my Peloton and working out with my trainer and walking.
Okay. But see, that's where I want to back up. You use this term, quote unquote, an athlete. What is quote unquote an athlete according to you?
So this is an interesting thing. I was on the Gatorade Women's Advisory Board for years. And one of the things that stood out from research was that women who regularly worked out and were still participating in even like fun runs and stuff would not call themselves an athlete. But men who played basketball like once a month were like, yes, I'm an athlete.
Right.
And so it's that same thing of like, how do we see ourselves and how do we label ourselves? I am a forever athlete, and I still, in whatever capacity I can, will try to compete at things. But it just doesn't feel the same to me if I can't go play in games. I can't, and I can't even really compete. I'd like to get into more golf. It takes so much time, but I feel like that would be my last chance. Maybe bowling. Like if I was going to try to really get better at something. And
well, what about curling? I feel curling, like, okay, yes. All the curlers are going to write in and be like, but
no, it's not to say that it's easy, but it is less difficult in terms of like high impact movement. So maybe I should get into curling.
Okay. Yeah. Maybe we could do that together. So, I ask you this question because it's one I've contemplated, as the host of this new podcast, because I do want to cast the net wide, and it's one I've contemplated for myself. And it's funny because I think that you're right that women are reluctant to say that. It's also, I think people are more reluctant to assign that term athlete to women. I get the question a lot, and people don't think of me as an athlete. Meanwhile, I think I've been an athlete all my life. I've always, and I can say like, I do this and I do this and I do this sport. And
regularly. Hiking is miles. That's hard. Sport. That's being an athlete. Yeah,
that's right. So I'll just say, I think you're an athlete. I just think that you come from this more organized, competitive world.
Yeah, I just have to reset my expectations.
Yeah. Okay. So after college, how do you get here, Sarah? Like you go, you're like, okay, I'm not going to be a professional athlete, which had never really been in your plans. What was in your plans?
So my lifelong dream, which I refuse to give up until I perish, is Saturday Night Live. I realize that they are not adding cast members in their 40s, but maybe something will change.
Wait till your 50s. Like they're really looking for women in their 50s.
Yes, that's when I really will peak. Yeah. So growing up, I was always into entertaining. I was all-state in band and chorus. I wanted to be in every talent show and play that I could while doing all the sports at the same time. I always joke that heptathlon is just a microcosm, macrocosm of my life, like jack of all trades. Like don't focus on one thing, do all the things, all the events, all the activities. And so I knew I wanted to do acting and comedy stuff, but I also wanted to make sure I majored in something that was, going to set me up for life after school, even if I didn't decide that acting was what I wanted. So I was an English major, moved out to LA a couple months after college. And I was like, let me fail fast. Let me see if I like this. Let me see if I like it in practice as opposed to just the idea. Took acting classes, did Second City, did the full improv conservatory out in LA. And I actually took a TV hosting boot camp that was a 3-day weekend class. And in the class, we were practicing throwing to break and teases and things like that. And we were supposed to pick something we were an expert in. And everyone wanted to do HGTV. It had just started. So everyone was like interior design expert. And I was like, I'm a Ivy League English major. I'm not going to do a show about like literature. So I just did a fake Chicago Bears football show. And it was not for any purpose other than to practice. And the teacher said afterwards, okay, so you want to get into sports? And I said, oh, no, there's no women in sports. There's like a couple women. They look like supermodels on the sidelines. They don't get to be funny. Right. I want to be funny. She said, well, it seems very natural for you. You could try it. So I took a class in TV sports reporting at UCLA Extension. So, available to non-students. And all of a sudden it was like the heavens opened up. I was like, oh, shit, this is writing, extemporaneous thinking, interview skills. I've been a Division I athlete. I've been an athlete my whole life. I've been in locker rooms. I've been around people. Why didn't this occur to me? And the reason it didn't is because there was like so few women that despite my love of sports and my interest, no one had ever recommended it, mentioned it, thought about it. It's not crossed my mind. And so when I decided to give it a shot, I realized how natural it was and how it was kind of bringing together all these skill sets. And it felt to me like something I could earn way more so than acting. Acting kept feeling like, who do you know? Who have you met? Yeah. What dickhead do you have to pretend to like and be nice to, even though he's, and in my case, some of the people I met, gross, racist, sexually harassing, unimpressive morons that I'm supposed to, oh, you're amazing. Oh my God, can I be in your movie? And sports felt like, oh, I know this stuff. If I work at it and I learn my craft and I study, I can work my way toward it the way I worked toward Cornell and something else, Right. And it just became a fit. And as soon as I really put my mind to it, it started clicking in a way that felt really natural.
You did enter a world that wasn't the most welcoming one to women, I'm going to guess. And
yeah,
what happened?
That was a wake-up call.
Yeah,
actually. And really? I admit now to such naivete, but my parents are lawyers. They had a law practice together. They still do. Mm-hmm. So they are partners. In fact, originally after law school, they worked somewhere that was allowing my dad to become a lawyer and was making my mom be a paralegal. And so they left and started their own firm and said, she went to law school too. We're going to be equals and partners. So I got raised, and it wasn't like hammered home, but it was just so clear to me. There was no question that, oh, whatever I want to do, I'm going to be able to do it and I'm going to crush it. Put something in front of me, I will crush it. And, I was very privileged. Growing up in the suburbs of Chicago, going to Cornell, I'm full of opportunities to get the things I want if I just work hard for them.
Right.
And all of a sudden, I get thrown into my first big job where I'm on camera and working as talent as opposed to behind the scenes, was for a startup website in Chicago. I was in the locker room for a handful of teams. My first time, I didn't have to do the like work in a small market and record your own things and then send them in. I got to, really get this great opportunity in a big market in Chicago. And I was treated like crap. Everyone assumed I was there trying to sleep with the players. Everyone assumed I was a moron. I got so much judgment walking into rooms, and I couldn't win. If I came in a baggy shirt, the comments on the internet were, "Are you fat or pregnant?" If I came in with something more form-fitting, it was, "She's trying to screw all the players." I'm 6 feet tall. I have big boobs. If I walk into a room, I can't really impact how people see me, but I stand out, especially if there's 0 other women in the room, right? And so very early on, I dealt with all the stuff that I had read about that I somehow thought I would be impervious to. Oh, but it's not going to happen to me. I'm smart. I'm a D1 athlete. I'm coming in. I know my stuff. No, I still got treated just as shitty as everyone else. And it really required some good pep talks from some mentors in the business. And the best was Steve Cochran, a longtime radio guy. I went to him basically in tears, and I was like, I am being treated so crappy. And it's so unfair. I haven't done anything to deserve this. I had some people behind the scenes. There was one woman who said that someone in the Cubs had said I was distracting because of my boobs. And thankfully she was in the room, and she said, what's she supposed to do? Like hang them up outside and pick them up on her way out? Like it was, I couldn't win. And so he said, just be so good they can't say no to you. That's it. You just have to make the work so good that it is not a question of whether you should be quote unquote allowed. And that's what I did. I just put my head down, worked as hard as I could, made myself stand out for the stuff I was doing. A lot of it was bringing my improv sensibilities to bring out the personalities of the athletes I was interviewing, which the fans loved and hadn't really gotten to see much of. And eventually, I got noticed enough to work my way up ESPN and be on Outside the Lines and be on SportsCenter and be in these places. And going back into those same locker rooms, all of a sudden, oh, okay, I saw you on that show. You're really smart. You know your stuff. Yeah, I always was.
Well, I love that advice that you got. And I love that you were able to use it in a way that ended up contributing to your success. And I know you're going to agree with me before I even say it, but I think what's unfortunate when it comes to, anytime, whether it's about gender or race or fill in the blank, you have to be better. You have to be really good to be basically accepted as average.
Well, you're assumed beforehand to not be good enough until
the default
otherwise.
Position.
And men are assumed to belong there until they prove that they're not. And it's a bullshit from the beginning.
It goes without saying, pretty much you were covering male athletes. Is that right? Because, hey, who was covering women's sports?
I was covering predominantly men I was covering only men really in that first job. And then started with the ESPN 1000, the local radio station. And that was all men. You could barely squeeze in a fact about Serena Williams winning something.
Which is
that was about it.
Which is stunning, right? Like, that we have to squeeze in Serena Williams, like, one of the greatest athletes of all time.
What I found there was like early on, it was like, okay, I need to prove that I can just hang with the guys. Like I need to be someone that they're like, oh, Sarah Spain, she's awesome. Let's go grab a beer with her and talk sports.
Yeah.
And I wasn't there for too long before I realized that I wasn't okay with just that and taking my little spot. I was the first woman on the air in 11 years every day. And I was like, I shouldn't be grateful for just that. And so every once in a while, even though I was supposed to just come and do updates every half hour or 15 minutes, like tonight the Cubs take on the Reds, it's a 7 p.m. start, I would turn my mic on every once in a while when I would hear the host talking about women in certain ways and just a little bit of pushback. Always funny. I use my background in comedy all the time in my business to make sure I'm not emasculating people outright. I'm just saying clever, quippy things that are pushing back on them, constantly degrading women. It was always whether she lost her fastball or whether she was hot. It was the only 2 ways women would come up, right? And eventually, not too long into I think a year and a half maybe, I got hired to work for ESPNW, which was just launching, which was geared toward female athletes and sports fans, and allowed me to do a lot of the work I was doing still covering men's sports, but also have this outlet writing about, reporting on, and telling stories about women athletes. And so I've been doing that now for 2 decades plus. And that has always been a huge place for me to feel like I was getting so much satisfaction out of a job, not just talking about who had the most home runs or who should be the NBA MVP, but really doing all this intersectional work. And that was the groundwork for this new iHeart Women's Sports, this network of shows, and the work I'm doing now where I get to do it daily, full time, which is awesome.
Yeah, it's astonishing. And also, I mean, those 20 years, it's hard to, I know to answer this question concisely because it's a long story, but if you had to sum that up, that journey from, walking into that locker room and being told that your boobs are distracting and being, a key part of a women's sports network, like how has coverage of women's sports evolved over these years?
I think the biggest things are, number one, expectations for gender in society have changed significantly. There is much less of a straight up, here's your lane, whether that's LGBTQ plus representation, whether that's just non-binary or more masc or feminine presenting women. We're just allowing women to be multidimensional in a way that was not a thing, whether that's the people reporting on screen or the people competing. And the authenticity that allowed these women to show made them much more interesting and relatable and fun and cool than when it was like, let's put all the WNBA players on the hood of a car saying like, we got next, even if it didn't feel authentic.
Which actually happened.
It actually was how they tried
wasn't
to
a hypothetical
early on. A bunch of lesbians in halter tops being like, hey guys, we got next. And somehow that wasn't exactly the appeal they wanted. So yeah, just letting people be queer or straight or a villain or funny or all these things opened up so many doors. And I think that's just society in general. And then it leaked into women's sports. Secondarily, there are gatekeepers across the industry that had the major decision-making power to decide what they thought the world was interested in. Editors at newspapers, program directors at radio and TV, and they're predominantly middle-aged white men saying, here's what people care about. The four major men's sports, and maybe occasionally golf or tennis or something. But to never have the door ajar to potentially see the really great stories in other sports, particularly women's, was to say for everybody, you don't want this. And then when social media came around, those gatekeepers weren't in charge of who were creating content and who was following that content. And what became clear was people wanted U.S. women's national team soccer. People wanted WNBA. People wanted NWSL. People wanted more stories about women athletes. And instead of those people being able to say, no, we're not covering that, content creators rose up and made that content. And then it was just clear to anyone in power, we're missing out on major opportunities here by not covering this. And those investments early on, ESPNW and We Need to Talk and things like that, really changed the game. I think those are the two biggest. The other one is streaming services, allowing for there not to be a competition where we choose between men's sports or women's sports. You can go watch your women's sports. You got to find it on Peacock and Paramount and, everywhere streaming. But once that starts to blow up, now we give more opportunities on primetime, regional and national networks as well. So that investment could come not at the expense of men, but in addition to.
Imagine that there's room for all of us.
There's room.
One thing, I live in Portland, Oregon, and in the neighborhood where there's this wonderful place called the Sports Bra. Have you heard about this place?
Yeah. Jenny Wynn.
Yeah. And so it's just like a 10-minute walk from my house. So I go and have lunch there. And the first time I went there, what I was so struck by, which is something that had never directly struck me before, is I looked around, there were 5 TV screens, all of them playing silently, all of them featuring a different women's sport happening. And I realized that I had never seen that before. And how many restaurants and bars I've been in over the course of my life, and there's that silent screen, and there has never been a woman on it. It's always sports played by men. Yeah. And it really moved me. And it does seem to be so much of the problem is like, we can't support and become invested in and fall in love with what we can't see, what we don't know.
It's been really frustrating how often that argument has been used where folks will say, well, if you like it, why aren't you all watching it? If you like the WNBA, why aren't all the women watching it? How do we find it? Where's the money invested in it? When we go, this was decades ago when it started, the value add is clearly not the same as going to like an NBA game. So we're already being told up front, this isn't worth as much. This isn't as good or as cool. And then we can't talk about it at the water cooler. It doesn't show up in pop culture. It's not something our boss decides that the whole company does for an outing. We are being over and over and over again told this is not something you should care about. And then we're being asked, why don't you care about that? And when you put literally anything behind it, U.S. women's national soccer team, the 99ers, a variety of Olympic events where we actually get coverage where we get told the stories and then we care. It could be curling. It could be anything. If you tell us and then we learn enough to get the star stake stats and stories to follow along, we're into it.
Yeah.
And so that was not happening in any space for women's sports for such a long time. In fact, the well was being poisoned. When the WNBA started, prominent ESPN talking head men were saying it was a joke. It was the punchline on late night talk shows. The idea that empowered women who were making a living for themselves, who were competing in something aggressive and physical, would be mocked by men because it was offensive to them, or it was challenging, or it emasculated them that women would be in quote unquote their space, is so lame and tired. And I think society is finally at a place where we're calling out men. Like, why do you care? Why are you on a WNBA message board wasting your one wild and precious life to make fun of women athletes? What if this was your sister? Wouldn't it be cool if your sister was in the Olympics?
Yeah.
Why is that not, like, where does that miss? And so I think that's changed a lot. And I mean, I urge so many people, especially if they're listening to your show and they're not regular quote unquote sports fans, to go to a women's sporting event and experience what you felt at the sports bra, because it feels so different.
It is.
Emma Hayes, the manager of the U.S. women's soccer team, said people who go to men's sporting events feel cortisol. People who go to women's sporting events feel dopamine.
Yeah.
And that's the difference. It's like you're not fighting. Everyone's not drunk and shoving each other. It is inclusive and beautiful and inspiring and empowering and like so freaking fun. You just have to go try it.
It's absolutely joyous. And, I agree. And, back to ourselves as little girls. I mean, I was reflecting on before our conversation, like, well, who are those first women athletes who were influential to me? I want to ask you about that too. But, I realized it was like, well, I only got to really see women athletes, at least on that national or international stage, every 4 years when the Olympics would roll around. I mean, it wasn't on, we just had network TV when I was a kid. And it was like, and even now that battle is being fought. I remember being a teenager in 1984 when it was this big deal. The women get to run the marathon at the Olympics. This, and Joan Benoit won. And it was like, and I was I was in track and cross country at that time. And I was so moved by that. And I was like, oh, finally women are allowed to run the marathon. And this is still happening. There are still events from which women are excluded on the
Nordic combined at just the most recent Olympics.
That's right. That's right. And, so this battle continues where it's not even like, the question isn't, can they actually do it? Are we allowed to see them doing it?
Right. Well, and I like to say this because I can't believe how recent it is, but within the last 15 years, the head of the International Ski Jumping Federation still said women shouldn't ski jump because their uteruses will fall out. This is the most I have never heard of a single uterus in my life falling out. And if it did happen, there would be a market for uteri because people would be missing them. And it's never happened from horseback riding or marathon running or ski jumping or soccer playing or football. And yet the pseudoscience that has been carried along with women trying to compete since hundreds of years ago is so persistent because it's not about sports. It's about keeping women in their lane.
Yeah.
It's about telling them you should be home and barefoot and pregnant. And the most important thing about you is that your uterus is properly functioning. So you cannot put it in harm's way. And also, I remember reading this once and I got so angry. The idea that women being funny, if it takes away from their attractiveness, is so off-putting that people don't enjoy it. So women comedians must be funny, but never at the expense of their aesthetics, because that's their number one value.
Right.
And I remember Christopher Hitchens had written a story for Vanity Fair called "Why Women Aren't Funny."
I know
Still
that
makes my face
just
get so
I
red.
I know. We're getting really worked up,
but
here,
it was
Sarah.
literally about how we don't want you to be funny because we need to know that you're going to be caretaking and take care of our babies.
Yeah.
Oh, and so I think the idea that there is so much deeply rooted patriarchal bullshit that has affected the ability for women to just play, not to mention compete and thrive and make money, is infuriating at every step. And knowing that that's there with intention, I think that's another thing that I've been harping on, especially in the last couple of years, focusing on women's sports, is how much people think the product is to blame for it not being as successful as men's, when in fact, across history, there are endless touch points of intentionally tanking it. There was There was a ban for women's soccer up until 1970 in England because there was a game that drew more fans than the men's. And the men got so sad and pissy about it that they freaking banned women from playing for, decades.
We're getting very worked up about this, but we've got to now take a deep, restorative, meditative breath, because we're going to switch hats here, my dear Sarah Spain. You've got the right, initials, because we're going to add some sugar to.
Oh, okay, great.
It's okay.
Sugar Spain.
Sugar Spain. Sugar
That'd be
Strayed.
my boxing name.
We've got Sugar Strayed and we've got Sugar Spain. I'm going to read this letter, and you're going to see why I chose it for you, because it's relevant to our conversation.
Okay.
Dear Sugar, I'm a 31-year-old woman who works in construction. I happened into this profession after getting my BFA in painting and drawing, and I needed a job. A friend from high school, also a woman, had a small house painting business, and I took what I thought would be a summer gig with her, but I ended up staying for 8 years. Together with a small group of 4 or 5 other women, we expanded our skills and ended up doing home repairs, small construction projects, as well as interior and exterior painting jobs. The business explicitly billed itself as woman-led, so most of our clientele were other women who sought us out. A year ago, my husband and I decided to move to a new city where housing is less expensive and where we can be closer to our families. I found a new job at a more traditional company, by which I mean one that is run by men and that employs men almost exclusively. Of the 10 employees, I'm the only woman. My boss and coworkers have been great overall, though at the beginning with some of them, I got the sense I had to prove myself in a way that's only based on gender. Sound familiar?
Yeah.
After some initial feeling of being the odd woman out, I now feel like a solid member of the team. My issue is with a good number of our clients. I wouldn't say I experience sexism on a daily basis, but I experience it regularly enough. Sometimes it's as simple as the skeptical or surprised way they look at me when I show up to do work that they obviously think can only be done by men. Other times, they don't keep that thought silent. They say it out loud. Or they'll comment on my appearance. One man said I had a nice figure, which I guess he thought was a welcome compliment. Or they'll ask me why a person, quote, like me would want this sort of job, which they'd never ask a man. It's exhausting. There are days that I feel truly proud to be a woman in the skilled trades, especially when young girls see me and realize they're capable of doing things like literally knocking down walls. Or older women actually cheer that I, a woman, am there to do the work they've only seen men do before. On those days, I feel like I'm contributing to change in a positive way. But other days, I wonder about the emotional toll it takes on me to have to carry this weight of so often having to prove to others that I'm a capable professional simply because of my gender. I'm not even sure what advice I'm asking you for, Sugar. I guess it's that I'm questioning how I might find a deeper sense of comfort or confidence in spite of the rampant sexism that's still all around me, or even if that's possible. Are my only choices to accept things as they are or find another job in another field? I miss my old cohort of tradeswomen and the feminist customers who sought us out. But there's not a business like that in my new city, and I don't have an interest in running my own business at this point. How can I find my groove in this less woman-friendly work environment? Signed, Tradeswoman. That's made for you, Sarah.
Yeah, tradeswoman, I feel you. I have to tell you, I just gave a speech a couple months ago, and the man sitting down to me was also speaking, and he was next to me, and he said, "Oh, how long you been at ESPN and sports stuff?" I said, "Oh, 20 years." He said, "Oh, do you like sports?" And I was like, how am I still getting this question? When I started, it was annoying. And now 20 years in, it's annoying. So I'm going to give you the best advice first, and then I'm going to give you some supplementary advice. The best advice is you cannot allow anyone to have power that you would not ask for advice. So if someone is a person who judges women as less than, who thinks that women can't do these jobs, then that's not someone whose opinion you would ever value and think is a smart, inspired, informed one. So don't give them that power. I know Tina Fey and Amy Poehler are two people who have said various versions of this, but never accept a no from someone who can't give you a yes. If that person can't hire you, fire you, pay you, tell you did a good job or not, then why would you let them convince you that their no means anything? So what I would say is community is what allowed me to find that. Connecting with other women and sharing our experiences, even the very worst experiences of sexual harassment, of being disrespected. Because as soon as you recognize it's not about you, it's about them, then you stop internalizing it as having any value, and you instead draw strength from the fact that it is a universal thing that you're going through, and it means nothing about whether you belong or not. And then the final one is, when I feel super overwhelmed, and it's usually from doom scrolling. Like if I'm scrolling and I'm like, oh, war. Oh, sad monkey rejected by its mom. Oh, dog got lost. And then, polar bear on the last ice float that exists. Like I'll suddenly hit a wall.
Right.
And I will have no recourse except for to shut my phone down. And my answer is usually something like donate money somewhere or sign up to volunteer. I need to do something proactive that I feel like is counteracting what I'm seeing that I hate so much. So could she create a weekend workshop for young girls to introduce them to the work that she does?
Yeah.
So that tactile feeling of I'm changing this thing that frustrates me, instead of just digesting and receiving it, I am putting out in the other direction energy towards something that will make me feel good. Even if it doesn't remove those clients or change their opinion, it just feels useful. That usually to me allows me to give fewer fucks about bad people if I'm making the space that I'm in feel different.
Yeah. I think that's all incredibly great advice, and it boils down to that building community in any way you can is so powerful. And it does, when you do that, I think you can work toward achieving that first thing you mentioned, which really boils down to having more confidence, feeling less invalidated over time by those sexist statements or those expressions on the faces, that when people greet you. And it's brilliant advice. The only thing I'd add to that, from my own experience as a writer, I can't tell you how many times I've had male interviewers or sometimes male fans say things to me. Like I've been on live radio where before we go live, the broadcaster will say, oh my gosh, I read Wild. I couldn't put it down. I loved it so much. And then we go live and he'll say, Cheryl Strayed has written a powerful book for women. And, I was just like, I finally and what I did is I practiced saying this because I didn't want to insult anyone. And because I knew there wasn't ill intent. Sometimes there is ill intent, but sometimes there isn't. And I thought, I am going to practice a gentle corrective. So every time a man said that to me, and they've said that to me in many different ways, hundreds of times now, I say, actually, I didn't write it for women. I wrote it for people. And, it's okay. There are some people who do write books for women. My books, I write for people.
Right.
So, and a lot of men love my books. And so I actually learned how to say that out loud in a calm and confident way. And so to tradeswomen, I would say maybe think of a couple, a sentence or two you can say to people that in some ways just addresses their sexism in a way that doesn't make you feel uncomfortable, doesn't create conflict, but that is a corrective. And maybe some of those people will go, you'll wake them up with that statement.
Yeah, something as simple as, oh, you'd be surprised how many women are great carpenters. Or, oh, you'd be surprised. Oh, in my old job, it was all women. There's so many of us. Something throwaway that doesn't sound too aggressive because, again, part of the issue, and one thing I mentioned earlier about using my sense of humor is that feeling of someone getting emasculated. You don't know what their response will be. So I think having a little lightness about it, and to your point, practicing some things that are very simple pushbacks, but are not aggressive or starting a fight so that they might learn from it. And that's, for me, how I've been able to change a lot of minds in my industry is by being funny and likable and smart. And they're rooting for me in spite of themselves so that when I tell them they're being sexist or wrong, they're more likely to listen to me than if they think I'm no fun, if I'm shrill, if I'm a difficult woman, right? And so I hate to have to give that advice of do it with a smile, but it's a lot more effective.
Yeah. And it does in the end feel empowering because what you are doing is setting a boundary. And in every context where I've had to learn how to verbally set a boundary, it's so scary at first. But once I can learn how to say it, it becomes easier to say every time.
Yeah. People are much more responsive if you are disappointed as opposed to angry. So if it's sort of oh, that's such a bummer to hear that you haven't had any other women tradeswomen, there's a bunch that I know. Hopefully you'll get a couple more great ones.
Right.
As opposed to, I'm angry at you for saying that. Because then, oh, I'm defensive now. Oh, I didn't even mean that. Or what? You're hysterical, whatever men say, right? Instead of, oh, I would think that you would know that there's so many of us. Oh, you seem like a smart guy. Don't you know there's so many of us who are great at this?
So tradeswoman, we wish you all the best and we know you got this. And I guess by way of one more bit of advice for her, Sarah, is I'm curious about you. You are in your 40s. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I'm in my 50s and tradeswoman is 31. And I think this idea of confidence that you and I have both talked about, or learning how to set boundaries, those things, like, I have to admit, I'm a whole lot better at that now than I was, 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, right? You learn as you grow. And that is one of the glorious things about life. And I imagine that confidence and strength and courage that you've gained over these years contributes to your daily podcast, Good Game with Sarah Spain. I was thinking about, okay, that's daunting to have something interesting and new to say every day. I'm curious about how you have managed that without fretting about it too much and worrying about it too much. Or do you fret and worry?
I don't at all. I could talk to a wall for hours. Hours. When I was like 7, I was like, Mom, Dad, can you get paid to talk? And they were like, not really. And I'm like, well, let me show you. I was worried at first about content, and we have no problem. In fact, our shows are much longer than they were supposed to be. They were supposed to be around 20 to 25 minutes a day, and instead we are often closer to an hour. There's so many new leagues. There's so many stories to tell. There's so many athletes, so much history. Part of our show is how do we give you the history and the nuance and the context so that you enjoy Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark, but also know that the people that came before them, like Lisa Leslie and Cheryl Swoops and all these other players, helped create this thing that they're building on. So yeah, I'm more likely to be thinking, how do we cut some of this than where do we find more of it? And I love creating a daily community, which is what's been missing in women's sports, is the repetitive everyday knowledge that builds on itself so that people want to watch that game or turn on the TV and go, oh, this is the one where the teammates are married. Or, ooh, this is the one where the people playing each other are divorced. Those stories that are so good that we don't get in our everyday sports coverage.
So you've made a lot of your own wishes come true when it comes to women's sports. What if you got a couple of more? Like, what would they be?
I am constantly torn about keeping the space what it is, which is so wonderful on its own, versus how do we make sports be sports that are men and women, depending on which game you're watching, so that more of it is concurrently discussed. I want you to turn on SportsCenter and have it be just as likely that the WNBA is a debate point and not just a highlight, as now, where you're more likely to get one highlight or a quick thing and then a 20-minute conversation about some trade that happened in the NFL. I want more discussion, more debate, more watching of the games and talking about the X's and O's to give people those things that they can grab onto and talk about at the barbershop or the bar or the water cooler. I think that's what I want most, is a little bit more of hand in hand. Like, if you love sports, you love all these things. I still love my Chicago Cubs and my Chicago Bears, and I watch them, and I watch the WNBA and the NWSL and all the other things. The way we watch the Olympics is a great model. It's just, hey, did we tell you the stories enough that you care? Yes, on both accounts, men and women. And then I think women athletes are finally getting their due when it comes to pay, attention, media coverage, like those things that they've deserved for such a long time. And a lot of brands are starting to realize they're better salespeople because they're authentic. They're deeply involved in their own social media in a way that a lot of male athletes aren't. And the representation in women's sports of every color of the rainbow, every sexual expression, every gender expression, like, to me, is a beautiful way for the world to exist. And I wish that that would spill out into the men's space, where men could come out and be queer and be professional athletes, where they could express themselves, like, the Bears quarterback, Caleb Williams, who paints his nails to honor his mom and gets called names because of it. I want men to have the freedom to be authentically themselves the way women are in women's sports space, and for all of society to sort of just start to buy in on a future that looks like that.
I want all of those things too. So we have to close, but I cannot end without asking you, because we are called Mind Over Mountain. I'm curious if you can share with us, what's the highest, hardest mountain you've had to climb? Or you could do it one in the past, or one that's ahead. What mountain are you still trying to climb ahead of you?
So I have to preface this by saying I'm about the luckiest human alive. I'm going to knock on wood, but I've had such a joyful and privileged experience in life, and I have faced very few big mountains. The one that is persistent and is the most frustrating to me is a lack of comfortability in my body, despite being such an empowered athlete. When I applied my body to sport, I didn't worry about it. It gave me what I wanted. It was strong and fast, and I could jump and throw and run and beat everybody and all the things. But because I've never been rail thin, because I'm 6 feet tall and I stand out, and I'm not super overweight, I'm just not 120 pounds. And especially in a business where being on TV, people are constantly commenting on it. In a society, in a world where people want women to be small, it has always been tough for me to reconcile who I am in my head and what I believe about how much time I should waste in my one precious life worrying about something I only have so much control over versus the inevitability of how I feel about how other people see me and how much time I've spent dieting and not eating and working out nonstop to an end that was never going to be what people wanted. I have had plenty of eating disorder issues and working out nonstop, and I still wasn't that skinny. Like, it's just not going to happen. I got a big old rack and I got hips, and this is what I was, thank God some people like it. But I think the mountain for me is like, I'm 45 and I'm still doing this.
Yeah.
I'm considering GLP-1s. I just would like to know what life would be like if I didn't have to think about it every second and work so hard in what feels like a battle with what my body's doing. It's not clearly processing what I put in a way that it should compared to, for my entire life, I've watched what my friends eat and do and been like, why is this not working out for me? I'm doing all the things times 11. I used to bring vegetables to fraternity frat parties instead of eating a burger. Like, that's so lame. And it didn't work. And I think the thing that frustrates me is reconciling what I know in my head with what I feel, which is still this uncomfortability in like not being a twig. And not because I want to be small. I have no interest in being small. I just want to look perfect in clothes and never have to put a pillow in front of my stomach and never worry about anyone saying, eat less, try a salad on the internet. Even though I'm a vegetarian and I'm like, all I eat is salad. So I think that's it. And it's so lame that that's still my mountain. It makes me so angry that that's still my mountain.
I just thank you so much for being honest and really courageous, because I know exactly what you mean when you say it's so lame. And I just want to say that's a story that you told yourself. So not only do you have to feel shitty about your body, you have to feel shitty about feeling shitty about your body. And you have, spoken like what you have described is a journey I have been on a long time too. And I really have reached all the same places that you have, and with real frustration with myself too. Like, why am I still thinking about this? And also, why do I think about this even when it's contrary to my values?
Yes,
like my genuine, true.
Yes.
I do not value women based on what they look like, what they weigh. I do not judge women based on what they look like and what they weigh. And
except myself.
I carry it around in myself all the time. And, I think that I wrote this in one of my Dear Sugar columns a long time ago, is I do think that the body is the final frontier for the feminist movement. And maybe there's probably another frontier beyond that. But it's one that we have not, that we're still lost in the wilderness there.
Yep.
And women and girls are not being served by any of the narratives about beauty.
It's getting better, but
it's getting better.
Yeah, it's still.
And there have been but I think that this is, if we're going to be honest, there were times in my life that I was like, I'm going to pretend I feel great about myself and I have body confidence. Maybe, if you act it, it will come kind of. But I think that that's the truth of it. And I think you, as somebody who, are so intimately engaged with every day, talking about the things that women, the incredible, epic things that women do with their bodies. And then there it is. You just described the epic war that you have with yourself. And all I can say, dear heart, is with you in the struggle. And I don't know any of the, I don't know how you get up that mountain. I think it's one of those mountains that shouldn't have ever been there to begin with for us.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe go through it. Maybe I'll build a tunnel. Spent too much time in Italy at the Olympics. I went through a lot of mountains. Right. I went through them, not over them.
Maybe on the West Coast here with the volcanic mountains. Maybe it's like Mount St. Helens. Just blow it up one of these days.
It up, and
then you don't have to walk to the top of it.
Down.
Yeah. Well, wow. It is. It's like the dear sugar in me wants to offer you some advice. But what I can say is you aren't alone. And maybe that's always the best advice ever, is to just join hands and say, I do think that the more we talk about it and like bring it out into the open and say that's what's there, instead of pretending, change will come. We can only change what we bring into to the light. And so you did that here today, dear Sarah. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. I can't believe I get to be on your show. It's such a joy.
I love talking to you. You are really such a wonderful person. Thank you. And you're funny as hell too. So you can come and do stand up in my attic any day.
Yes, please.
Thanks so much for being on Mind Over Mountain.
Thanks for having me on Mind Through Mountain.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to submit a letter seeking advice, please send it to me at deardearsugar@gmail.com. And don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Happy trails, and I'll see you next week. Mind Over Mountain with Cheryl Strayed is an iHeart Women's Sports production, produced by Brittany Brown and Rodney Brown of Barbara Jean Productions. Supervising producer is Kaylin West at Realm. Associate producer, Amaya Brathwaite. Our executive producers are Molly Barton, Jerry Carita, Grace Fuse, and Jesse Katz. Our theme song is composed by Gramoscope Music. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Happy trails, and I'll see you next week.